Godfall is a third-person action RPG looter slasher that recently came out on PS5 and PC. There was a lot of hype surrounding this game up to its release, partly because it's one of the first PS5 games, and also I would imagine because of the astounding visuals we've been shown on this game over the past year. Games in this genre that are focused solely on loot aren't typically my favorite type, but I decided to give Godfall a chance. By the end of this video, you'll have my final verdict and some extra thoughts, and it's not going to be in your typical 1 to 10 scale type review, so make sure to stick around for that. Without further ado, let's talk about Godfall. Don't get too excited about the story in this game. Godfall's story is pretty short, basic, and predictable, and to be honest, I found myself not even paying much attention to it. With that said, that's actually okay in some games where the focus is not actually supposed to really be on the story. This mostly goes for many games with a lot of endgame content that goes on well past the initial story, or games with a lot of PvP where players play the game specifically for that, or even some games like the Souls series. Now I know there's a lot of great lore with the Dark Souls games, but I personally play those types of games for the challenge of the combat. Bloodborne was one of my favorite games of all time, and I couldn't tell you one thing about what was going on story-wise. So verdict for Godfall's story, not that good, but also not necessarily that important for a game that's advertised to be an endgame looter slasher. If you're looking for a great epic tale, you're choosing the wrong game. The visuals in Godfall are absolutely stunning, although the art style might not be liked by all, and I can understand that. There's no denying that when you're walking through a gold-plated temple, you feel pretty epic. Some of the general areas in the maps were not as great, but overall being in the world felt very Godfall-ish, if that makes sense. They did a great job with the lighting, the armor you wear, the massive structures, and some of the enemies that you come across. I found myself returning to the water realm often just to run around and take it in. Great job in this aspect, I am impressed. The Valorplate system is basically your armor, and it looks cool, sounds cool, but ends up being kind of shallow. Switching to a different Valorplate is fun at first for the looks, but then you realize it doesn't do much in terms of actual gameplay. At later stages in the endgame, you do want your Valorplate features to match up with the rest of your build so that you can stack damage types and be more effective, but it doesn't really change much in terms of what you actually do. In a game where you don't get to create your own character, I was hoping Valorplates would bring more uniqueness, but they really don't. Not to mention it was really easy to acquire all of them, so there was no feeling of accomplishment or even much excitement when I actually got a new one. In terms of your playstyle, weapons are for the most part what decide how your character is going to play. Hammers and great swords are big and slower weapons. Daggers are extremely fast. Long swords, which was my personal favorite, are right in the middle along with pole arms. Every weapon that falls under the same weapon type basically is the same, even if they look different. They do have different features and some can be very useful, but I never was really that excited to get a new sword. On top of that, like we just talked about, the Valorplate's armor system is pretty underwhelming, and early on in my playthrough I already started questioning why would I even want to farm for loot. The combat in Godfall is pretty smooth and I actually had fun. This is very surprising from a guy who typically doesn't enjoy hack and slash type games. Key word here though is I had fun. On my first run through the game, I found myself excited to hop back on and slash away at enemies. Accompany the combat with the smooth animations that I had on my PC setup and the nice visuals, and I want to give some credit here. I really enjoyed some of the extra skills such as throwing your shield and of course the special weapon techniques. However, the problems start to come when you realize most of the mobs that you come across don't really require you to do anything but swing away every single time. Although I was having fun and it felt good, this type of system doesn't seem to typically last that long. One of my main hopes for this game was to get a Dark Souls feel with the combat, which in turn was what was going to keep me coming back for more. When I say Dark Souls feel, I don't necessarily mean in terms of how you fight, but more so in terms of the challenge and the overwhelming feeling of having to succeed despite your odds. I know many people don't actually enjoy that frustrating struggle, but I do, and it's the only way that I can stay engaged in a game that doesn't have any other goal besides looting. I will give Godfall credit in some regards here though, for a couple of the bosses were fun and certainly intense. However, on normal difficulty, you realize it's kind of a walk in the park. The reason being is that all you have to do is get a boss's health down to one of the many checkpoints on their health bar. And then if you do die, the boss's health will not regenerate past that checkpoint, and you spawn right back in near the boss. This changed a lot about the fights because I found myself not caring as much because of this system. All I had to do was get them down to one checkpoint at a time, and I had unlimited attempts. Now many might say, why didn't you just play on hard? Well, I did try out the hard difficulty, but it proved to be more of a pain in the ass than actually making my experience more involved. On hard, you can only die 3 times and then the mission resets, which initially I was excited for. But when I did end up failing, the process of having to start the mission completely over became more boring than just fighting a boss on normal. I think there needs to be a better system for both difficulties because I didn't really like either of them. There also just needs to be way more bosses. With the endgame, I have to be honest here, I didn't get too far into it. Once I realized that Valorplates and new weapons don't do much in terms of your gameplay, and instead they more so just make numbers better, it was hard to convince myself to grind for anything. I did try out the Dreamstones and the Trials, which are both endgame activities, but without the desire to care much for loot, the only thing that would make me want to continue playing would be crazy Dark Soul type bosses. Even though I did give credit for some of the bosses, once I saw them repeating themselves in the endgame over and over, or just giving us 2 repeat bosses in one fight to change it up, I lost my excitement. Maybe I didn't reach far enough into the endgame to truly experience what it has to offer, but so far there just doesn't seem to be much variety. Now I want to tell you guys how I think Godfall could actually be a decent game. The simple answer is lower the price. It's not a horrible game in my opinion. I think a lot of things were really cool and fun, and there's some good ideas going on here. I did enjoy my playthrough even though I didn't get too far into the endgame, and I don't regret playing it. But we have to take price into account here for the review, and this is currently a $60 game. I think this in particular has done them the most harm because people are expecting a game as big as like Destiny. If Godfall was even $30, I might have no problem telling people to buy it and have some fun for a little while. Games in lower price ranges are usually not expected to be insanely big, have a ton of variety, and an endless addicting endgame. In fact, if Godfall was cheaper, I would probably tell people it's a good game for its price. Have you heard any other reviewers say this? I'm actually curious. But unfortunately, it seems to have been over-advertised and it falls short of expectations for what a full-priced game should be. When people feel they didn't get what they paid for, they get super angry, and those types of feelings are contagious.